Science and Criticism articles by H. P. Blavatsky. The Signs of the Times. Literary jottings. The blessings of publicity. The electric and magnetic affinities between man and nature. The substantial nature of magnetism. H. P. Blavatsky. Series number 24. Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Ltd. Bangalore 560,004. Objects of the Theosophical Movement. I. To form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. 2. The study of ancient and modern religions, philosophies, and sciences, and the demonstration of the importance of such study. And 3. The investigation of the unexplained laws of nature and the psychical powers latent in man. The articles of H. P. Blavatsky and W. Q. Judge, which originally appeared in the Theosophist, Lucifer, and the Path, were issued in pamphlet form by the Theosophy Company, Los Angeles, USA. For the benefit of students and inquirers in India, these are now being reprinted in an Indian edition. EI reprint edition, 1984 SI2HIL1J1LRRI by courtesy, the Theosophy Company, 245, West 33rd St., Los Angeles, California. 90007, USA. Printed by V. N. Iyer at Commercial Printing House, 41/1, 3rd Main Road, Gandhinagar, Bangalore 560,009 and published by J. M. Tijoriwala for Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Basavangudi, Bangalore 560,004. In The Signs of the Times, which appeared in Lucifer for October, 1887, HPB took note of the spreading public interest in the occult side of nature, as reflected in popular literature, novels, and scientific essays, remarking that this apparently irrepressible tendency was evidence that the educated mind of the time was struggling to free itself from the fetters of materialism. Having noted that even attacks, especially when aggressively hostile, had the effect of drawing attention to theosophical ideas, she then turned to a darker aspect of that period, speaking of the crimes committed by hypnotists through the power of suggestion, and of the enormous danger of such practices to the ignorant and unprepared. Even the occult fiction of the time contained facts, regardless of invented plots and characters. Occultism and sorcery, she said, are in the air, with no true philosophical knowledge to guide the experimenters and thus check evil results. The present application of this discussion and comment will be evident to all readers. Literary Jottings, an early departmental title in Lucifer during HPB's editorship, was posthumously published in Lucifer for September, 1892, and signed with her initials. Here speaks the bold declaration of what she elsewhere described as the fighting, combative manas of her magazine. This article is a defense of criticism as the sole salvation from intellectual stagnation. Readers of Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine are well aware of the necessity she was under to attack the orthodoxies of both religion and science, in order to gain a fair hearing for the occult doctrines. New ideas, one of her teachers had said, have to be planted on clean places, and the exposure of prejudice and preconception was a first order of business for HPB. A graphic expression in this article may be applied to her pioneer work, which was to cut entirely new paths through the great virgin forests and thickets of public ignorance. The habit of some scientists and other modern writers to condemn or ridicule the idea of secrecy regarding certain occult truths was the target of HPB's article, The Blessings of Publicity, which also appeared after her death, in Lucifer for August, 1891. She briefly explained that there are secrets that kill in the arcana of occultism, then pointed to the numerous parallels in scientific discovery, such as the invention of dynamite and its murderous application in infernal machines, having shown that there is much in science that might better have been kept secret, a view hardly debatable. A century later she spoke of the far more dangerous and lethal uses to which occult secrets might be put. It is not, she concluded, in the present age of suggestion and explosives that occultism can open wide the doors of its laboratories except to those who do live the life Since Newton's time, although Newton was not himself an offender, there has been a tendency among scientists to put description in the place of explanation. This is one of the points made by HPB in The Electric and Magnetic Affinities Between Man and Nature, an article published in the Theosophist for February, 1881. Supposing the canons of scientific knowledge to be thus satisfied, they then feel free to reject and laugh at actual explanations offered by philosophers or transcendentalists. Yet behind many of the discoveries of science lie occult powers of nature, and the nature of these powers is by no means explained in scientific theory, but only the working of their effects. Various illustrations are given by HPB, drawn from the annals of science dealing with electrical and magnetic phenomena, especially the generation of electricity by human organisms and the electromagnetic relationships between man and nature. These examples of vital electricity are wholly without explanation, save in the doctrines of the occultists. The Substantial Nature of Magnetism, another of HPB's posthumously printed articles, appeared in Lucifer for September, 1891. In this extended examination and criticism of the views of the substantialists, a group of American Christians who in some of their ideas had come very close to the occult teaching of magnetism, yet who clung to anthropomorphic beliefs, HPB makes plain the grave mistake of personifying the dynamics of non-material forces which originate on supersensuous planes. This article is especially valuable in showing the crucial importance of metaphysical clarity and the need for care in philosophical definition and explanation. HPB plainly prefers the candid denials of the materialists to the confusion of the substantialists who, despite their recognition of what HPB identifies as occult realities, insist upon calling entities what are no more than immaterial perceptive effects. Referring to the language used by the substantialists, HPB declares, no Bain, no Huxley, nor even Haeckel, has ever confused to this degree mental and physical phenomena. This article is filled with instruction on the important distinctions required by philosophical and scientific investigation. The Signs of the Times. It is intensely interesting to follow season after season the rapid evolution and change of public thought in the direction of the mystical. The educated mind is most undeniably attempting to free itself from the heavy fetters of materialism. The ugly caterpillar is writhing in the agonies of death, under the powerful efforts of the psychic butterfly to escape from its science-built prison, and every day brings some new glad tidings of one or more such mental births to light. As the New York Path truly remarks in its September issue, when theosophical and kindred topics are made the texts for novels, and, we may add, scientific essays and brochures, the implication is that interest in them has become diffused through all social ranks. That kind of literature is paradoxically proof that occultism has passed beyond the region of careless amusement and entered that of serious inquiry. The reader has but to throw a retrospective glance at the publications of the last few years to find that such topics as mysticism, magic, sorcery, spiritualism, theosophy, mesmerism, or, as it is now called, hypnotism. All the various branches in short of the occult side of nature, are becoming predominant in every kind of literature. They visibly increase in proportion to the efforts made to discredit the movements in the cause of truth, and strangle inquiry whether on the field of theosophy or spiritualism by trying to besmear their most prominent heralds, pioneers and defenders, with tar and feathers. The keynote for mystic and theosophic literature was Marion Crawford's Mr. Isaacs. It was followed by his Zoroaster. Then followed The Romance of Two Worlds, by Marie Corelli, R. Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Fallen Idol, by Anstey, King Solomon's Mines and the Thrice Famous She, by Rider Haggard, Affinities and the Brother of the Shadow, by M.R.S. Campbell Praed, Edmund Downey's House of Tears, and many others less noticeable. And now there comes a fresh outburst in Florence Marriott's Daughter of the Tropics, and F. C. Phillips' Strange Adventures of Lucy Smith. It is unnecessary to mention in detail the literature produced by avowed theosophists and occultists, some of whose works are very remarkable, while others are positively scientific, such as S. L. MacGregor Mather's Kabbalah Unveiled, and Dr. F. Hartmann's Paracelsus, Magic, White and Black, etc. We have also to note the fact that Theosophy has now crossed the Channel, and is making its way into French literature. La France publishes a strange romance by C. H. Chinchal, pregnant with Theosophy, occultism, and mesmerism, and called La Grande Prêtresse, while La Revue Politique El Herrera, February 19. 1887, LSEQ, contained over the signature of T. H. Benson, a novel called Emancipé, wherein esoteric doctrines and adepts are mentioned in conjunction with the names of well-known theosophists. A sign of the times. Literature, especially in countries free from government censorship, is the public heart and pulse. Besides the glaring fact that were there no demand there would be no supply, current literature is produced only to please, and is therefore evidently the mirror which faithfully reflects the state of the public mind. True, conservative editors, and their submissive correspondents and reporters, still go on slashing occasionally in print the fair faces of mystic spiritualism and theosophy, and some of them are still found, from time to time, indulging in a brutal personal attack. But they do no harm on the whole, except perhaps to their own editorial reputations, as such editors can never be suspected of an exuberance of culture and good taste after certain ungentlemanly personal attacks. They do good on the contrary. For, while the Theosophists and Spiritualists so attacked, may view the Billingsgate poured upon them in a true Socratian spirit, and console themselves with the knowledge that none of the epithets used can possibly apply to them, on the other hand, too much abuse and vilification generally ends by awakening the public sympathy for the victim, in the right-minded and the impartial, at any rate. In England people seem to like fair play on the whole. It is not Bashi-Bozokuk actions, the doughty deeds of those who delight in mutilating the slain and the wounded, that can find sympathy for any great length of time with the public. If, as maintained by our lay enemies and repeated by some naive and too sanguine missionary organs, spiritualism and theosophy are dead as a doornail, sick, vide American Christian periodicals, dead and buried, why, in such case, good Christian fathers, not leave the dead at rest till Judgment Day? And if they are not, then editors. The profane as well as the clerical, why should you still fear? Do not show yourselves such cowards if you have the truth on your side. Magna est ventus et provali bit, and murder will out, as it always has, sooner or later. Open your columns to free and fearless discussion, and do as the theosophical periodicals have ever done, and as Lucifer is now preparing to do. The bright sun of the morning fears no light. He courts it, and is prepared to publish any inimical contributions, couched, of course, in decent language, however much at variance with his theosophical views. He is determined to give a fair hearing in any and every case, to both contending parties, and allow things and thoughts to be judged on their respective merits. For why, or what should one dread when fact and truth are one's only aim? Du choc des opinions jaillit la vérité was said by a French philosopher. If theosophy and spiritualism are no better than gigantic frauds and will-o'-the-wisps of the age, why such expensive crusades against both? And if they are not, why should agnostics and searchers after truth in general, help bigoted and narrow-minded materialists, sectarians, and dogmatists to hide our light under a bushel by mere brutal force and usurped authority? It is easy to surprise the good faith of the fair-minded. Still easier to discredit that, which by its intrinsic strangeness, is already unpopular and could hardly be credited in its palmiest days. We welcome no supposition so eagerly as one which accords with and intensifies our own prejudices, says, in Don Jesualdo, a popular author. Therefore, facts become often cunningly concocted frauds, and self-evident, glaring lies are accepted as gospel truths at the first breeze of Don Basilio's calumnia, by those to whose hard-crusted preconceptions such slander is like heavenly dew. But, beloved enemies, the light of Lucifer may, after all, dispel some of the surrounding darkness. The mighty roaring voice of denunciation, so welcome to those whose little spites and hates and mental stagnation in the grasp of the social respectability it panders to, may yet be silenced by the voice of truth, the still small voice whose destiny it ever was to first preach in the desert. That cold and artificial light which still seems to shine so dazzlingly over the alleged iniquities of professional mediums and the supposed sins of commission and omission of non-professional experimentalists, of free and independent theosophists, may yet be extinguished at the height of all its glory. For it is not quite the perpetual lamp of the alchemist philosopher. Still less is it that light which never shone on sea or land, that ray of divine intuition, the spark which glimmers latent in the spiritual, never-erring perceptions of man and woman, and which is now awakening, for its time is at hand. A few years more, and the Aladdin's lamp, which called forth the ministering genius thereof, who, making 3 salutes to the public, proceeded forthwith to devour mediums and theosophists, like a juggler who swallows swords at a village fair, will get out of order. Its light, over which the anti-theosophists are crowing victory to this day, shall get dim. And then, perhaps, it will be discovered that what was claimed as a direct ray from the source of eternal truth was no better than a penny rushlight, in whose deceitful smoke and soot people got hypnotized, and saw everything upside down. It will be found that the hideous monsters of fraud and imposture had no existence outside the murky and dizzied brains of the Aladdins on their journey of discovery. And that, finally, the good people who listened to them, had been all the time seeing sights and hearing things under unconscious and mutual suggestion. This is a scientific explanation, and requires no black magicians or dugpas at work, for suggestion as now practiced by the sorcerers of science is dugpaship itself, per sang. No Eastern adept of the left hand can do more mischief by his infernal art than a grave hypnotizer of the faculty of medicine, a disciple of Charcot, or of any other scientific light of the first magnitude. In Paris, as in St. Petersburg, crimes have been committed under suggestion. Divorces have occurred, and husbands have nearly killed their wives and their supposed co-respondents, owing to tricks played on innocent and respectable women, who have thus had their fair name and all their future life blasted forever. A son, under such influence, broke open the desk of an avaricious father, who caught him in the act, and nearly shot him in a fit of rage. One of the keys of occultism is in the hands of science, cold, heartless, materialistic, and crassly ignorant of the other truly psychic side of the phenomenon, hence, powerless to draw a line of demarcation between the physiological and the purely spiritual effects of the disease inoculated, and unable to prevent future results and consequences of which it has no knowledge, and over which it has, therefore, no control. We find in the Lotus of September, 1887, the following. A French paper, the Paris, for August 12, contains a long and excellent article by G. Montorgueil, entitled, The Accursed Sciences, from which we extract the following passage, since we are, unfortunately, unable to quote the whole. Some months ago, already, in I forget what case, the question of suggestion was raised and taken account of by the judges. We shall certainly see people in the dock accused of occult malpractices. But how will the prosecution go to work? What arguments will it bring to bear? The crime by suggestion is the ideal of a crime without proof. In such a case the gravest charges will never be more than presumptions, and fugitive presumptions. On what fragile scaffolding of suspicions will the charge rest? No examination, but a moral one, will be possible. We shall have to resign ourselves to hearing the Solicitor General say to the accused, "Accused, it appears from a perquisition made into your brain," etc. Ah, the poor jurymen! It is they who are to be pitied. Taking their task to heart, they already have the greatest difficulty in separating the true from the false, even in rough and ready cases, the facts of which are obvious, all the details of which are tangible and the responsibilities clear. And we are going to ask them on their soul and conscience to decide questions of black magic. Verily their reason will not hold out through the fortnight, it will give way before that and sink into thaumaturgy. We move fast. The strange trials for sorcery will blossom anew, somnambules who were merely grotesque will appear in a tragic light, the coffee grounds, which so far only risked the police court, will hear their sentence at the assizes. The evil eye will figure among criminal offences. These last years of the XIXTH century will have seen us step from progress to progress, till we reach at last this judicial enormity, a second Laubardemont prosecuting another urbane grandeur. Serious, scientific, and political papers are full of earnest discussions on the subject. A St. Petersburg daily has a long feuilleton on the bearing of hypnotic suggestions upon criminal law. Cases of hypnotism with criminal motives have of late begun to increase in an ever-progressing ratio, it tells its readers. And it is not the only newspaper, nor is Russia the only country where the same tale is told. Careful investigations and researches have been made by distinguished lawyers and medical authorities. Data have been assiduously collected and have revealed that the curious phenomenon which skeptics have hitherto derided, and young people have included among their evening petties jo innocence, is a new and terrible danger to state and society. Two facts have now become patent to law and science. That, in the perceptions of the hypnotized subject, the visionary representations called forth by suggestion, become real existing actualities, the subject being, for the moment, the automatic executor of the will of the hypnotizer, and, 2. That the great majority of persons experimented upon, is subject to hypnotic suggestion. Thus Liebald found only 60 subjects intractable out of the 700 he experimented upon, and Bernheim, out of 1014 subjects, failed with only 26. The field for the natural-born jadoo-walla, sorcery-mongers, is vast indeed. Evil has acquired a playground on which it may now exercise its sway upon many a generation of unconscious victims. For crimes undreamed of in the waking state, and felonies of the blackest dye, are now invited and encouraged by the new accursed science. The real perpetrators of these deeds of darkness may now remain forever hidden from the vengeance of human justice. The hand which executes the criminal suggestion is only that of an irresponsible automaton, whose memory preserves no trace of it, and who, moreover, is a witness who can easily be disposed of by compulsory suicide again under suggestion. What better means than these could be offered to the fiends of lust and revenge, to those dark powers called human passions ever on the lookout to break the universal commandment, "Thou shalt not steal, nor murder, nor lust after thy neighbor's wife." Liebald suggested to a young girl that she should poison herself with prussic acid, and she swallowed the supposed drug without one moment's hesitation. Drive. Legois suggested to a young woman that she owed him 5,000 francs, and the subject forthwith signed a check for the amount. Bernheim suggested to another hysterical girl a long and complicated vision with regard to a criminal case. 2 days after, although the hypnotizer had not exercised any new pressure upon her in the interim, she repeated distinctly the whole suggested story to a lawyer sent to her for the purpose. Had her evidence been seriously accepted, it would have brought the accused to the guillotine. These cases present two dark and terrible aspects. From the moral standpoint, such processes and suggestions leave an indelible stain upon the purity of the subject's nature. Even the innocent mind of a 10-year-old child can thus be inoculated with vice, the poison germ of which will develop in his subsequent life. On the judicial aspect it is needless to enter in great detail. Suffice to say that it is this characteristic feature of the hypnotic state, the absolute surrender of will and self-consciousness to the hypnotizer, which possesses such importance, from its bearing upon crime, in the eyes of legal authorities. For if the hypnotizer has the subject entirely at his beck and call, so that he can cause him to commit any crime, acting, so to say, invisibly within him, then what are not the terrible judicial mistakes to be expected? What wonder then, that the jurisprudence of one country after the other has taken alarm, and is devising, one after the other, measures for repressing the exercise of hypnotism. In Denmark it has just been forbidden. Scientists have experimented upon sensitives with so much success that a hypnotized victim has been jeered and hooted through the streets on his way to commit a crime, which he would have completed unconsciously, had not the victim been warned beforehand by the hypnotizer. In Brussels, a recent and sad case is well known to all. A young girl of good family was seduced while in a hypnotized state by a man who had first subjected her to his influence at a social gathering. She only realized her condition a few months later, when her relatives, who divined the criminal, forced her seducer to make the only possible reparation, that of marrying his victim. The French Academy has just been debating the question, how far a hypnotized subject, from a mere victim, can become a regular tool of crime. Of course, no jurist or legislator can remain indifferent to this question, and it was averred that the crimes committed under suggestion are so unprecedented that some of them can hardly be brought within the scope of the law. Hence the prudent legal prohibition, just adopted in France, which enacts that no person, save those legally qualified to exercise the medical profession, shall hypnotize any other person. Even the physician who enjoys such legal right is permitted to hypnotize a person only in the presence of another qualified medical man, and with the written permission of the subject. Public seances of hypnotism are forbidden, and they are strictly confined to medical clinics and laboratories. Those who break this law are liable to a heavy fine and imprisonment. But the keynote has been struck, and many are the ways in which this black art may be used, laws notwithstanding. That it will be so used, the vile passions inherent in human nature are sufficient guarantee. Many and strange will be the romances yet enacted, for truth is often stranger than fiction, and what is thought fiction is still more often truth. No wonder then that occult literature is growing with every day. Occultism and sorcery are in the air, with no true philosophical knowledge to guide the experimenters and thus check evil results. Works of fiction, the various novels and romances are called fiction in the arrangement of their characters and adventures of their heroes and heroines admitted. Not so, as to the facts presented. These are no fictions, but true presentiments of what lies in the bosom of the future, and much of which is already born, nay corroborated by scientific experiments. Sign of the times. Close of a psychic cycle. The time for phenomena with, or through mediums, whether professional or otherwise, is gone by. It was the early season of the blossoming, of the era mentioned even in the Bible, *The tree of occultism is now preparing for fruiting, and the spirit of the occult is awakening in the blood of the new generations. If the old men only dream dreams, the young ones see already visions, and record them in novels and works of fiction. Woe to the ignorant and the unprepared, and those who listen to the sirens of materialistic science. For indeed, many will be the unconscious crimes committed, and many will be the victims who will innocently suffer death by hanging and decapitation at the hands of the righteous judges and the two innocent jurymen, both alike ignorant of the fiendish power of suggestion. It shall come to pass that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions. Joel 2:28. 2. It is curious to note that Mr. Louis Stevenson, one of the most powerful of our imaginative writers, stated recently to a reporter that he is in the habit of constructing the plots of his tales in dreams, and among others that of Drive. Jekyll. I dreamed, he continued, the story of Olalla *. And I have at the present moment 2 unwritten stories which I have likewise dreamed. Even when fast asleep I know that it is I who am inventing, but who knows whether the idea of invention is not also a dream. Literary jottings on criticism, authorities, and other matters by an unpopular philosopher. Theosophists and editors of theosophical periodicals are constantly warned, by the prudent and the faint-hearted, to beware of giving offense to authorities, whether scientific or social. Public opinion, they urge, is the most dangerous of all foes. Criticism of it is fatal, we are told. Criticism can hardly hope to make the person or subject so discussed amend or become amended. Yet it gives offense to the many, and makes theosophists hateful. Judge not, "If thou wilt not be judged," is the habitual warning. It is precisely because Theosophists would themselves be judged and court impartial criticism, that they begin by rendering that service to their fellow men. Mutual criticism is a most healthy policy, and helps to establish final and definite rules in life, practical, not merely theoretical. We have had enough of theories. The Bible is full of wholesome advice, yet few are the Christians who have ever applied any of its ethical injunctions to their daily lives. If one criticism is hurtful, so is another, so also is every innovation, or even the presentation of some old thing under a new aspect, as both have necessarily to clash with the views of this or another authority. I maintain, on the contrary, that criticism is the great benefactor of thought in general, and still more so of those men who never think for themselves but rely in everything upon acknowledged authorities and social routine. For what is an authority upon any question, after all? No more, really, than a light streaming upon a certain object through one single, more or less wide, chink, and illuminating it from one side only. Such light, besides being the faithful reflector of the personal views of but one man, very often merely that of his special hobby, can never help in the examination of a question or a subject from all its aspects and sides. Thus, the authority appealed to will often prove but of little help, yet the profane, who attempts to present the given question or object under another aspect and in a different light, is forthwith hooted for his great audacity. Does he not attempt to upset solid authorities, and fly in the face of respectable and time-honored routine thought? Friends and foes, criticism is the sole salvation from intellectual stagnation. It is the beneficent goad which stimulates to life and action, hence to healthy changes, the heavy ruminants called routine and prejudice, in privateers in social life. Adverse opinions are like conflicting winds which brush from the quiet surface of a lake the green scum that tends to settle upon still waters. If every clear stream of independent thought, which runs through the field of life outside the old grooves traced by public opinion, had to be arrested and to come to a standstill, the results would prove very sad. The streams would no longer feed the common pond called society, and its waters would become still more stagnant than they are. Result: it is the most orthodox authorities of the social pond who would be the first to get sucked down still deeper into its ooze and slime. Things, even as they now stand, present no very bright outlook as regards progress and social reforms. In this last quarter of the century it is women alone who have achieved any visible beneficent progress. Men, in their ferocious egoism and sex privilege, have fought hard, but have been defeated on almost every line. Thus, the younger generations of women look hopeful enough. They will hardly swell the future ranks of stiff-necked and cruel Mrs. Grundy. Those who today lead her no longer invincible battalions on the warpath, are the older Amazons of respectable society, and her young men, the male flowers of evil, the nocturnal plants that blossom in the hothouses known as clubs. The Brummels of our modern day have become worse gossips than the old dowagers ever were in the dawn of our century. To oppose or criticize such foes, or even to find the least fault with them, is to commit the one unpardonable social sin. An unpopular philosopher, however, has little to fear, and notes his thoughts. Indifferent to the loudest war cry from those quarters, he examines his enemies of both sexes with the calm and placid eye of one who has nothing to lose, and counts the ugly blotches and wrinkles on the sacred face of Mrs. Grundy, as he would count the deadly poisonous flowers on the branches of a majestic manzanilla through a telescope from afar. He will never approach the tree, or rest under its lethal shade. "Thou shalt not set thyself against the Lord's anointed," saith David. But since the authorities, social and scientific, are always the first to break that law, others may occasionally follow the good example. Besides, the anointed ones are not always those of the Lord, many of them being more of the self-anointed sort. Thus, whenever taken to task for disrespect to science and its authorities, which the unpopular philosopher is accused of rejecting, he demurs to the statement. To reject the infallibility of a man of science is not quite the same as to repudiate his learning. A specialist is one, precisely because he has some one specialty, and is therefore less reliable in other branches of science, and even in the general appreciation of his own subject. Official school science is based upon temporary foundations, so far. It will advance upon straight lines so long only as it is not compelled to deviate from its old grooves, in consequence of fresh and unexpected discoveries in the fathomless mines of knowledge. Science is like a railway train which carries its baggage van from one terminus to the other, and with which no one except the railway officials may interfere. But passengers who travel by the same train can hardly be prevented from quitting the direct line at fixed stations, to proceed, if they so like, by diverging roads. They should have this option, without being taxed with libeling the chief line. To proceed beyond the terminus on horseback, cart or foot, or even to undertake pioneer work, by cutting entirely new paths through the great virgin forests and thickets of public ignorance, is their undoubted prerogative. Other explorers are sure to follow, nor less sure are they to criticize the newly cut pathway. They will thus do more good than harm. For truth, according to an old Belgian proverb, is always the result of conflicting opinions, like the spark that flies out from the shock of two flints struck together. Why should men of learning be always so inclined to regard science as their own personal property? Is knowledge a kind of indivisible family estate, entailed only on the elder sons of science? Truth belongs to all, or ought so to belong, excepting always those few special branches of knowledge which should be preserved ever secret, like those two-edged weapons that both kill and save. Some philosopher compared knowledge to a ladder, the top of which was more easily reached by a man unencumbered by heavy luggage, than by him who has to drag along an enormous bale of old conventionalities, faded out and dried. Moreover, such a one must look back every moment, for fear of losing some of his fossils. Is it owing to such extra weight that so few of them ever reach the summit of the ladder, and that they affirm there is nothing beyond the highest rung they have reached? Or is it for the sake of preserving the old dried-up plants of the past that they deny the very possibility of any fresh, living blossoms, on new forms of life, in the future? Whatever their answer, without such optimistic hope in the ever-becoming, life would be little worth living. What between authorities, their fear of, and wrath at the slightest criticism, each and all of them demanding to be regarded as infallible in their respective departments, the world threatens to fossilize in its old prejudices and routine. Fogyism grins its skeleton-like sneer at every innovation or new form of thought. In the great battle of life for the survival of the fittest, each of these forms becomes in turn the master, and then the tyrant, forcing back all new growth as its own was checked. But the true philosopher, however unpopular, seeks to grasp the actual life, which, springing fresh from the inner source of being, the rock of truth, is ever moving onward. He feels equal contempt for all the little puddles that stagnate lazily on the flat and marshy fields of social life. H.P.B. The blessings of publicity. A well-known public lecturer, a distinguished Egyptologist, said, in one of his lectures against the teachings of Theosophy, a few suggestive words, which are now quoted and must be answered: "It is a delusion to suppose there is anything in the experience or wisdom of the past, the ascertained results of which can only be communicated from beneath the cloak and mask of mystery. Explanation is the soul of science. They will tell you we cannot have their knowledge without living their life. Public experimental research, the printing press, and a free thought platform, have abolished the need of mystery. It is no longer necessary for science to take the veil, as she was forced to do for security in times past, etc. This is a very mistaken view in one aspect. Secrets of the purer and profounder life not only may but must be made universally known. But there are secrets that kill in the arcana of occultism, and unless a man lives the life he cannot be entrusted with them. The late Professor Faraday had very serious doubts whether it was quite wise and reasonable to give out to the public at large certain discoveries of modern science. Chemistry had led to the invention of two terrible means of destruction in our century to allow it to fall into the hands of the profane. What man of sense in the face of such fiendish applications of dynamite and other explosive substances as are made by those incarnations of the destroying power, who glory in calling themselves anarchists and socialists, would not agree with us in saying, far better for mankind that it should never have blasted a rock by modern perfected means, than that it should have shattered the limbs of 1% even of those who have been thus destroyed by the pitiless hand of Russian nihilists, Irish Fenians, and anarchists. That such discoveries, and chiefly their murderous application, ought to have been withheld from public knowledge may be shown on the authority of statistics and commissions appointed to investigate and record the result of the evil done. The following information, gathered from public papers, will give an insight into what may be in store for wretched mankind. England alone, the center of civilization, has 21,268 firms fabricating and selling explosive substances. One but the centers of the dynamite trade, of infernal machines, and other such results of modern civilization, are chiefly at Philadelphia and New York. It is in the former city of brotherly love that the now most famous manufacturer of explosives flourishes. It is one of the well-known respectable citizens, the inventor and manufacturer of the most murderous dynamite toys, who, called before the Senate of the United States anxious to adopt means for the repression of a too free trade in such implements, found an argument that ought to become immortalist for its cynical sophistry, my machines. That expert is reported to have said are quite harmless to look at, as they may be manufactured in the shape of oranges, hats, boats, and anything one likes. Criminal is he who murders people by means of such machines, not he who manufactures them. The firm refuses to admit that were there no supply there would be no incentive for demand on the market, but insists that every demand should be satisfied by a supply ready at hand. That supply is the fruit of civilization and of the publicity given to the discovery of every murderous property in matter. What is it? As found in the report of the commission appointed to investigate the variety and character of the so-called infernal machines, so far the following implements of instantaneous human destruction are already on hand. The most fashionable of all among the many varieties fabricated by Mr. Holgate, are the ticker, the 8-day machine, the little exterminator, and the bottle machine. The ticker is in appearance like a piece of lead, a foot long and 4 inches thick. It contains an iron or steel tube, full of a kind of gunpowder invented by Holgate himself. That gunpowder, in appearance like any other common stuff of that name, has, however, an explosive power 200 times stronger than common gunpowder, the ticker containing thus a powder which equals in force 200 pounds of the common gunpowder. At one end of the machine is fastened an invisible clockwork meant to regulate the time of the explosion, which one nitroglycerin has found its way even into medical compounds. Physicians and druggists are vying with the anarchists in their endeavors to destroy the surplus of mankind. The famous chocolate tablets against dyspepsia are said to contain nitroglycerin. They may save, but they can kill still more easily. Time may be fixed from 1 minute to 36 hours. The spark is produced by means of a steel needle which gives a spark at the touch hole, and communicates thereby the fire to the whole machine. The 8-day machine is considered the most powerful, but at the same time the most complicated, of all those invented. One must be familiar with handling it before a full success can be secured. It is owing to this difficulty that the terrible fate intended for London Bridge and its neighbourhood was turned aside by the instantaneous killing instead of the 2 Fenian criminals. The size and appearance of that machine changes, produce-like, according to the necessity of smuggling it in one or another way, unperceived by the victims. It may be concealed in bread, in a basket of oranges, in a liquid, and so on. The commission of experts is said to have declared that its explosive power is such as to reduce to atoms instantly the largest edifice in the world. The little exterminator is an innocent-looking plain utensil having the shape of a modest jug. It contains neither dynamite nor powder, but secretes, nevertheless, a deadly gas, and has a hardly perceptible clockwork attached to its edge, the needle of which points to the time when that gas will effect its escape. In a shut-up room this new vril of lethal kind, will smother to death, nearly instantaneously, every living being within a distance of 100 feet, the radius of the murderous jug. With these three latest novelties in the high season of Christian civilization, the catalogue of the dynamiters is closed, all the rest belongs to the old fashion of the past years. It consists of hats, portcigars, bottles of ordinary kind, and even ladies' smelling bottles, filled with dynamite, nitroglycerin, etc., etc. weapons, some of which, following unconsciously karmic law, killed many of the dynamiters in the last Chicago Revolution. Add to this the forthcoming long-promised Keely's vibratory force, capable of reducing in a few seconds a dead bullock to a heap of ashes, and then ask yourself if the Inferno of Dante as a locality can ever rival Earth in the production of more hellish engines of destruction. Thus, if purely material implements are capable of blowing up from a few corners, the greatest cities of the globe, provided the murderous weapons are guided by expert hands, what terrible dangers might not arise from magical occult secrets being revealed, and allowed to fall into the possession of ill-meaning persons. 1,000 times more dangerous and lethal are these, because neither the criminal hand, nor the immaterial, invisible weapon used, can ever be detected. The congenital black magicians, those who, to an innate propensity towards evil, unite highly developed mediumistic natures, are but too numerous in our age. It is nigh time then that psychologists and believers, at least, should cease advocating the beauties of publicity and claiming knowledge of the secrets of nature for all. It is not in our age of suggestion and explosives that occultism can open wide the doors of its laboratories except to those who do live the life. Theosophist, February 1881. The electric and magnetic affinities between man and nature. Without going too deeply into certain vexed questions based upon what the orthodox men of science please to term the hypothetical conclusions of the psychological school, whenever we meet with discoveries made by the former, coinciding perfectly with the teachings of the latter, we think ourselves entitled to make them known to the world of skeptics. For instance, this psychological, or spiritual, school holds that every being and naturally formed object is in its beginning, a spiritual or monadial entity which, having its origin in the spiritual or monadial plane of existence, must necessarily have as many relations with the latter as it has with the material or sensuous plane in which it physically develops itself. That each, according to species, evolves from its monadial center and essential aura, which has positive and negative magnetoid relations with the essential aura of every other, and that, mesmeric attraction and repulsion exhibiting a strong analogy with magnetic attraction and repulsion, this analogous attraction and repulsion obtains not only between individuals of the same, but of different species, not only in animate but in inanimate nature. Clairvoyance, Hygienic and Medical, by Jacob Dixon, LSAL. Thus if we give our attention but to the electric and magnetic fluids in men and animals, and the existing mysterious but undoubted interrelation between these two, as well as between both of them and plants and minerals, we will have an inexhaustible field of research, which may lead us to understand more easily the production of certain phenomena. The modification of the peripheral extremities of nerves by which electricity is generated and discharged in certain genera of fishes, is of the most wonderful character, and yet, to this very day its nature remains a mystery to exact science. For when it has told us that the electric organs of the fish generate the electricity which is rendered active by nervous influence, it has given us an explanation as hypothetical as that of the psychologists whose theories it rejects in toto. The horse has nerves and muscles as well as a fish, and even more so, the existence of animal electricity is a well-established fact, and the presence of muscular currents has been found in the undivided as well as in the divided muscles of all the animals, and even in those of man. And yet by the simple lashing of its feeble tail a small electrical fish prostrates a strong horse. Whence this electric power, and what is the ultimate nature and essence of the electric fluid? Whether as a cause or effect, a primary agent or a correlation, the reason for each of its manifestations is yet hypothetical. How much, or how little has it to do with vital power? Such are the ever-recurring and always unanswerable queries. One thing we know, though, and that is, that the phenomena of electricity as well as those of heat and phosphorescence, within the animal body, depend on chemical actions, and that these take place in the system just as they would in a chemist's laboratory, ever modified by and subjected to the same mysterious produce, the vital principle, of which science can tell us nothing. The quarrel between Galvani and Volta is well known. One was backed by no less an authority than Alexander Humboldt, the other by the subsequent discoveries of Matteucci, Dubois-Reymond, Brown-Séquard, and others. By their combined efforts, it was positively established that a production of electricity was constantly going on in all the tissues of the living animal economy, that each elementary bundle of fibrils in a muscle was like a couple in a galvanic battery, and that the longitudinal surface of a muscle acts like the positive pole of a pile, or galvanic battery, while the transverse surface acts like the negative pole. The latter was discovered by one of the greatest physiologists of our century, Dubois-Reymond, who, nevertheless, was the greatest opponent of Baron Reichenbach, the discoverer of the OD force, and ever showed himself the most fierce and irreconcilable enemy of transcendental speculation, or what is best known as the study of the occult, i.e., the yet undiscovered forces in nature. Every newly discovered power, each hitherto unknown correlation of that great and unknown force or the primal cause of all, which is no less hypothetical to skeptical science than to the common credulous mortals, was, previous to its discovery, an occult power of nature. Once on the track of a new phenomenon, science gives an exposition of the facts first independent of any hypothesis as to the causes of this manifestation, then finding their account incomplete and unsatisfactory to the public, its votaries begin to invent generalizations, to present hypotheses based upon a certain knowledge of principles alleged to be at work by reasserting the laws of their mutual connection and dependence. They have not explained the phenomenon, they have but suggested how it might be produced, and offered more or less valid reasons to show how it could not be produced, and yet a hypothesis from their opponent's camp, that of the transcendentalists, the spiritualists, and psychologists, is generally laughed down by them before almost these latter have opened their mouths. We will notice a few of the newly discovered electromagnetic phenomena which are still awaiting an explanation. In the systems of certain people, the accumulation and secretion of electricity reach under certain conditions to a very high degree. This phenomenon is especially observed in cold and dry climates, like Canada, for instance, as well as in hot, but at the same time, dry countries. Thus, on the authority of that well-known medical journal, The Lancet, one can frequently meet with people who have but to approach their index fingers to a gas beak from which a stream of gas is issuing, to light the gas as if a burning match had been applied to it. The noted American physiologist, Dr. J. H. Hammond, possesses this abnormal faculty upon which he discourses at length in his scientific articles. The African explorer and traveler Mitch Eisen informs us of a still more marvelous fact. While in the western part of Central Africa, he happened at various times in a fit of passion and exasperation at the natives, to deal with his whip a heavy blow to a Negro. To his intense astonishment, the blow brought out a shower of sparks from the body of the victim, the traveler's amazement being intensified by his remarking that the phenomenon provoked no comments, nor seemed to excite any surprise among the other natives who witnessed the fact. They appeared to look upon it as something quite usual and in the ordinary run of things. It was by a series of experiments that he ascertained at last, that under certain atmospheric conditions and especially during the slightest mental excitement, it was possible to extract from the ebony black body of nearly every Negro of these regions a mass of electric sparks. In order to achieve the phenomenon, it sufficed to gently stroke his skin, or even to touch it with the hand. When the Negroes remained calm and quiet, no sparks could be obtained from their bodies. In the American Journal of Science, Professor Loomis shows that persons, especially children, wearing dry slippers with thin solace, and a silk or woolen dress, in a warm room heated to at least 70 degrees, and covered with a thick velvet carpet, often become so electrically excited by skipping across room with a shuffling motion, and rubbing the shoes across the carpet, that sparks are produced on their coming in contact with other bodies, and on their presenting a finger to a gas burner, the gas may be ignited. Sulfuric ether has been thus inflamed, and in dry, cold weather sparks, half an inch in length, have been given forth by young ladies who had been dancing, and pulverized resin has been thus inflamed. So much for electricity generated by human beings. But this force is ever at work throughout all nature, and we are told by Livingstone in his travels in South Africa, that the hot wind which blows during the dry seasons over the desert from north to south is in such an electric state that a bunch of ostrich feathers, held a few seconds against it, becomes as strongly charged as if attached to a powerful electric machine, and clasps the advancing hand with a sharp cracking sound. By a little friction the fur of the mantles worn by the natives gives out a luminous appearance. It is produced even by the motion communicated in writing, and a rubbing with the hand causes sparks and distinct crepitations to be emitted. From some facts elicited by M. J. Jones, of Peckham, we find them analogous to the experiments of Dr. Reichenbach. We observe that a magnetoid relation subsists between subjects of a nervous temperament and shells, the outgrowth of living entities, and which, of course, determine the dynamical qualities of their natural coverings. The experimenter verified the results upon 4 different sensitive subjects. He says that he was first drawn to the inquiry by the fact of a lady looking at a collection of shells, complaining of pain while holding one of them. His method of experimenting was simply to place a shell in the subject's hand. The purpura chocolatum, in about 4 minutes, produced contraction of the fingers, and painful rigidity of the arm, which effects were removed by quick passes, without contact, from the shoulders off at the fingers. Again, he experimented with about 30 shells, of which he tried 12, on May 9, 1853, one of these causing acute pain in the arm and head followed by insensibility. He then removed the patient to a sofa, and the shells to a sideboard. In a short time, says Mr. Dixon, from whose book we quote the experiment, to his astonishment the patient, while still insensible, gradually raised her clasped hands, turning them towards the shells on the sideboard, stretching the arms out at full length, and pointing to them. He put down her hands, she raised them again, her head and body gradually following. He had her removed to another room, separated from that containing the shells by a 9-inch wall, a passage and a lath and plaster wall. The phenomenon, strange to say, was repeated. He then had the shells removed into a back room, and subsequently into other places, one of which was out of the house. At each removal the position of the hands altered to each new position of the shells. The patient continued insensible, for 4 days. On the third of these days the arm of the hand that had held the shells was swollen, spotted, and dark-colored. On the morning of the 4th day, these appearances had gone, and a yellow tinge only remained on the hand. The effluence which had acted most potently, in this experiment, proceeded from the cinder murex and the chamar necrophylla, which was most wonderful. The others of the 12 were the purpurata Cucia, Cerothenum orth, Pirula facordis, sea urchin, Australia, Valida castanea, Valida musica, Purpura chocolatum, Purpura hippocastanum, Melanatria fluminea, and Monodonta declavis. In a volume entitled The Natural and the Supernatural, M. Jones reports having tested the magnetoid action of various stones and wood with analogous results, but, as we have not seen the work, we can say nothing of the experiment. In the next number we will endeavor to give some more facts and then proceed to compare the hypotheses of both the exact and the psychological sciences as to the causes of this interaction between man and nature, the microcosm and the macrocosm. The substantial nature of magnetism and materialists who arraign the occultists and theosophists for believing that every force, so-called, in nature has at its origin a substantial noumenon, an entity, conscious and intelligent, whether it be a planetary, Tyan Kohan, or an elemental, are advised to fix their attention, first of all, on a far more dangerous body than the one called the Theosophical Society. We mean the society in the U.S. of America whose members call themselves the substantialists. We call it dangerous for this reason, that this body, combining in itself dogmatic church Christianity, the anthropomorphic element of the Bible with sterling science, makes, nevertheless, the latter subservient in all to the former. This is equivalent to saying, that the new organization, will, in its fanatical dogmatism if it wins the day lead on the forthcoming generation stoanthropomorphism past redemption. It will achieve this the more easily in our age of science worship, since a show of undeniable learning must help to impart additional strength to belief in a gigantic human God, as their hypotheses, like those of modern materialistic science, may be easily built to answer their particular aim. The educated and thoughtful classes of society, once set free from ecclesiastical thraldom, could laugh at a St. Augustine's or a Venerable Bede's scientific data, which led them to maintain on the authority and dead letter of what they regarded as revelation that our earth, instead of being a sphere, was flat, hanging under a crystalline canopy studded with shining bronze snails and a sun no larger than it appears. But the same classes will be always forced by public opinion into respecting the hypotheses of modern science in whatever direction the nature of scientific speculation may lead them. They have been so led for the last century into crass materialism, they may be so led again in an opposite direction. The cycle has closed, and if science ever falls into the hands of the opposition, the learned reverends and bigoted churchmen, the world may find itself gradually approaching the ditch on the opposite side and be landed at no distant future in crass anthropomorphism. Once more the masses will have rejected true philosophy, impartial and unsectarian, and will thus be caught again in new meshes of their own weaving, the fruitage and results of the reaction created by an all-denying age. The solemn ideal of a universal, infinite, all-pervading noumenon of spirit, of an impersonal and absolute deity, will fade out of the human mind once more, and will make room for the monster god of sectarian nightmares. Now, modern official science is composed as at present of 5% of undeniable axiomatic truths and facts, and of 95% of mere speculation. Furthermore, it has laid itself open to endless attacks, owing to its numerous mutually contradictory hypotheses, each one as scientific, in appearance, as the other. On the other hand, the substantialists, who rank, as they boast, among their numbers some of the most eminent men of science in the United States, have undeniably discovered and accumulated a vast store of facts calculated to upset the modern theories on force and matter. And once that their data are shown correct, in this conflict between materialistic science and a still more materialistic religion, the outcome of the forthcoming battle is not difficult to foresee. Modern science will be floored. The substantiality of certain forces of nature cannot be denied, for it is a fact in cosmos. No energy or force without matter, no matter without force, energy, or life however latent. But this ultimate matter is substance, or the noumenon of matter. Thus, the head of the golden idol of scientific truth will fall, because it stands on feet of clay. Such a result would not be anything to be regretted, except for its immediate consequences. The golden head will remain the same, only its pedestal will be replaced by one as weak and as much of clay as ever. Instead of resting on materialism, science will rest on anthropomorphic superstition if the substantialists ever gain the day. For, instead of holding to philosophy alone, pursued in a spirit of absolute impartiality, both materialists and adherents of what is so pompously called the philosophy of substantialism work on lines traced by preconception and with a prejudged object, and both stretch their facts on the Procrustean beds of their respective hobbies. It is facts that have to fit their theories, even at the risk of mutilating the immaculate nature of truth. Before presenting the reader with extracts from the work of a substantialist, those extracts showing better than would any critical review, the true nature of the claims of the substantial philosophy, we mean to go no further, as we are really very little concerned with them, and intend to waste no words over their flaws and pretensions. Nevertheless, as their ideas on the nature of physical forces and phenomena are curiously in some respects Only like the occult doctrines, our intention is to utilize their arguments on magnetism, to begin with. These are unanswerable, and we may thus defeat exact science by its own methods of observation and weapons. So far, we are only acquainted with the theories of the substantialists by their writings. It is possible that, save the wide divergence between our views on the nature of the phenomena producing causes as they queerly call physical forces, there is but little difference in our opinions with regard to the substantial nature of light, heat, electricity, magnetism, etc., etc., perhaps only one in the form and terms used. No theosophist, however, would agree to such expressions as are used in the new doctrine, e.g., if its principles be true, then every force or form of energy known to science must be a substantial entity. 4. Although Dr. Hall's proofs with regard to magnetic fluid being something more than a mode of motion are irrefutable, still there are other forces which are of quite a different nature. As this paper, however, is devoted to prove the substantiality of magnetism whether animal or physical, we will now quote from the Scientific Arena, July, 1886, the best arguments that have ever appeared against the materialistic theory of modern science. To admit for one moment that a single force of nature, such as sound, light, or heat, is but the vibratory motion of matter, whether that material body be highly attenuated as in the case of the supposed ether, less attenuated as in the case of air, or solid as in the case of a heated bar of iron, is to give away to the rank claims of materialism the entire analogy of nature and science in favor of a future life for humanity. And well do the materialistic scientists of this country and Europe know it. And to the same extent do they fear the spread and general acceptance of the substantial philosophy, knowing full well that the moment the forces of nature shall be recognized and taught by the schools as real substantial entities, and as soon as the mode of motion doctrines of sound, light, heat, etc., shall be abandoned, that soon will their materialistic occupation have gone forever. Hence, it is the aim of this present paper, after thus reiterating and enforcing the general scope of the argument as presented last month, to demonstrate force, per se, to be an immaterial substance and in no sense a motion of material particles. In this way we purpose to show the absolute necessity for Christian scientists everywhere adopting the broad principles of the substantial philosophy, and doing it at once, if they hope to break down materialistic atheism in this land, or logically to defend religion by scientific analogy, and thus prove the substantial existence of God as well as the probable substantial existence of the human soul after death. This they now have the privilege of doing successfully, and of thus triumphantly reinforcing their scriptural arguments by the concurrent testimony of nature herself. We could select any one of several of the physical forms of force as the crucial test of the new philosophy, or as the touchstone of substantialism. But to save circumlocution and detail of unnecessary explanation as much as possible, in this leading and paramount demonstration, we select what no scientist on earth will question as a representative natural force or so-called form of energy, namely, magnetism. This force, from the very simple and direct manifestation of its phenomena in displacing ponderable bodies at a distance from the magnet, and without having any tangible substance connecting the magnet therewith, is selected for our purpose, since it has well proved the champion physical puzzle to modern mode of motion philosophers, both in this country and in Europe, even to the greatest living physicists, such as Helmholtz, Tyndall, Sir William Thomson, and others. The mysterious action of magnetism, under any light which modern science can shed upon it, admittedly affords a problem which has proved to be completely bewildering to their intellects, simply because they have, unfortunately, never caught a glimpse of the basic principles of the substantial philosophy which so clearly unravels the mystery. In the light of these principles, such a thinker as Sir William Thomson, instead of teaching, as he did in his opening address on the five senses before the Midland Institute, at Birmingham, England, that magnetism was but the molecular motion, or as he expressed it, but the quality of matter or the rotation of the molecules of the magnet, would have seen at a glance the utter want of any relation, as cause to effect, between such moving molecules in the magnet, provided they do move, and the lifting of the mass of iron at a distance. It is passing strange that men so intelligent as Sir William Thomson and Professor Tyndall had not long ago reached the conclusion that magnetism must of necessity be a substantial thing, however invisible or intangible, when it thus stretches out its mechanical but invisible fingers to a distance from the magnet and pulls or pushes an inert piece of metal. That they have not seen the absolute necessity for such a conclusion, as the only conceivable explanation of the mechanical effects produced, and the manifest inconsistency of any other supposition, is one of the astounding results of the confusing and blinding influence of the present false theories of science upon otherwise logical and profound intellects, and that such men could be satisfied in supposing that the minute and local vibrations of the molecules and atoms of the magnet, necessarily limited to the dimensions of the steel itself, could by any possibility reach out to a distance beyond it and thus pull or push a bar of metal, overcoming its inertia, tempts one to lose all respect for the sagacity and profundity of the intellects of these great names in science. At all events, such manifest want of perspicacity in modern physicists appeals in a warning voice of thunder tones of rising young men of this country and Europe to think for themselves in matters pertaining to science and philosophy, and to accept nothing on trust simply because it happens to be set forth or approved by some great name. Another most remarkable anomaly in the case of the physicists to whom we have here referred is this: while failing to see the unavoidable necessity of an actual substance of some kind going forth from the poles of the magnet and connecting with the piece of iron, by which to lift it and thus accomplish a physical result, that could have been effected in no other way, they are quick to accept the agency of an all-pervading ether, a substance not needed at all in nature, by which to produce light on this earth as mere motion, and thus make it conform to the supposed sound waves in the air. In this way, by the sheer invention of a not needed material substance, they have sought to convert not only light, heat, and magnetism, but all the other forces of nature into modes of motion, and for no reason except that sound had been mistaken as a mode of motion by previous scientists, and strange to state, notwithstanding this supposed ether is as intangible to any of our senses, and just as unrecognized by any process known to chemistry or mechanics as is the substance which of necessity must pass out from the poles of the magnet to seize and lift the bar of iron, yet physicists cheerfully accept the former, for which no scientific necessity on earth or in heaven exists, while they stolidly refuse to recognize the latter, though absolutely needed to accomplish the results observed. Was ever such inconsistency before witnessed in a scientific theory? Let us scrutinize this matter a little further before leaving it. If the mere rotation of molecules in the steel magnet can produce a mechanical effect on a piece of iron at a distance, even through a vacuum, as Sir William Thomson asserts, why may not the rotation of the molecules of the sun cause light at a distance without the intervening space being filled up with a jelly-like material substance, of enormous rigidity, to be thrown into waves? It must strike every mind capable of thinking scientifically that the original invention of an all-pervading material, rigid, and inert ether, as the essential cause of light at a distance from a luminous body, was one of the most useless expenditures of mechanical ingenuity which the human brain ever perpetrated. That is, if there is the slightest truth in the teaching of Sir William Thomson that the mere rotation of molecules in the magnet will lift a distant bar of iron, why cannot the rotation of the sun's molecules just as easily produce light at a distance? Should it be assumed in sheer desperation by the mode-of-motion philosophers that it is the ether filling the space between the magnet and the piece of iron, which is thrown into vibration by the rotating molecules of the steel, and which thus lifts the distant iron, it would only be to make bad worse. If material vibration in the steel magnet, which is wholly unobservable, is communicated to the distant bar through a material substance, and its vibratory motions, which are equally unobservable, is it not plain that their effects on the distant bar should be of the same mechanical character, namely, unobservable? Instead of this, the iron is lifted bodily and seen plainly, and that without any observed tremor, as if done by a vibrating jelly such as ether is claimed to be. Besides, such bodily lifting of a ponderable mass is utterly incongruous with mere tremor, however powerful and observable such tremor or vibration might be, according to every principle known to mechanics. Common sense ought to assure any man that mere vibration or tremor, however powerful and sensible, can pull or push nothing. It is impossible to conceive of the accomplishment of such a result except by some substantial agent reaching out from the magnet, seizing therein, and forcibly pulling and thus displacing it. As well talk of pulling a boat to the shore without some rope or other substantial thing connecting you with the boat. Even Sir William Thomson would not claim that the boat could be pulled by getting up a molecular vibration of the shore, or even by producing a visible tremor in the water, as drive. Hamlin so logically shewed in his recent masterly paper on force. See Microsome, Volume VP 98. It is well known that a magnet will lift a piece of iron at the same distance precisely through sheets of glass as if no glass intervened. The confirmed atheist Mr. Smith, of Cincinnati, Ohio, to whom we referred in our papers on substantialism, in the Miasm, Volume IL, pages 278-31-1, was utterly confounded by this exhibition of the substantial force of magnetism acting at a distance through impervious plates of glass when we placed a quantity of needles and tacks on the plate and passed the poles of the magnet beneath it, causing them to move with the magnet. He saw for the first time in his life the operation of a real substance, exerting a mechanical effect in displacing ponderable bodies of metal in defiance of all material conditions, and with no possible material connection or free passage between the source and termination of such substantial agency. And he asked in exclamation, if this be so, may there not be a substantial, intelligent, and immaterial God, and may I not have a substantial but immaterial soul which can live separately from my body after it is dead? He then raised the query, asking if we were certain that it was not the invisible pores of the glass plate through which the magnetic force found its way, and therefore whether this force might not be a refined form of matter after all. He then assisted us in filling the plate with boiled water, on which to float a card with needles placed thereon, thus to interpose between them and the magnet the most imporous of all known bodies. But it made not the slightest difference, the card with its cargo of needles moving hither and thither as the magnet was moved beneath both plates and water. This was sufficient even for that most critical but candid materialist, and he confessed that there were substantial but immaterial entities in his atheistic philosophy. Here, then, is the conclusive argument by which we demonstrate that magnetism, one of the forces of nature, and a fair representative of all the natural forces, is not only a real, substantial entity, but an absolutely immaterial substance, one thus justifying our original classification of the entities of the universe into material and immaterial substances. 1. If magnetism were not a real substance, it could not lift a piece of metal bodily at a distance from the magnet, any more than our hand could lift a weight from the floor without some sub1. This is a very wrong word to use. See text HPB. Substantial connection between the two. It is a self-evident truism as an axiom in mechanics, that no body can move or displace another body at a distance without a real, substantial medium connecting the two through which the result is accomplished, otherwise it would be a mechanical effect without a cause. A self-evident absurdity in philosophy. Hence, the force of magnetism is a real, substantial entity. 2. If magnetism were not an immaterial substance, then any practically imporous body intervening between the magnet and the attracted object would, to some extent at least, impede the passage of the magnetic current, which it does not do. If magnetism were a very refined or attenuated form of matter, and if it thus depended for its passage through other material bodies upon their imperceptible pores, then, manifestly, some difference in the freedom of its passage, and in the consequent attractive force of the distant magnet should result by great difference in the porosity of the different bodies tested, as would be the case, for example, in forcing wind through wire netting having larger or smaller interstices, and consequently offering greater or less resistance. Whereas in the case of this magnetic substance, no difference whatever results in the energy of its mechanical pull on a distant piece of iron, however many or few of the practically imporous sheets of glass, rubber, or whatever other material body be made to intervene, or if no substance whatever but the air is interposed, or if the test be made in a perfect vacuum. The pull is always with precisely the same force, and will move the suspended piece of iron at the same distance away from it in each and every case, however refined and delicate may be the instruments by which the tests are measured. The above quoted passages are positively unanswerable. As far as magnetic force, or fluid, is concerned, the substantialists have most undeniably made out their case, and their triumph will be hailed with joy by every occultist. It is impossible to see, indeed, how the phenomena of magnetism, whether terrestrial or animal, can be explained otherwise than by admitting a material, or substantial magnetic fluid. This, even some of the scientists do not deny. Helmholtz, believing that electricity must be as atomic as matter, which it is, Helmholtz, Faraday lecture. And, unless science is prepared to divorce force from matter, we do not see how it can support its position much longer. But we are not at all so sure about certain other forces so far as their effects are concerned. An esoteric philosophy would find an easy objection to every assumption of the substantialists, e.g., with regard to sound. As the day is dawning when the new theory is sure to array itself against occultism, it is as well, perhaps, to anticipate the objections and dispose of them at once. The expression immaterial substance used above in connection with magnetism is a very strange one, and moreover, it is self-contradictory. If, instead of saying that magnetism is not only a real substantial entity but an absolutely immaterial substance, the writer should have applied this definition to light, sound, or any other force in its effects, we would have nothing to say, except to remark that the adjective supersensuous would have been more applicable to any force than the word immaterial. 3. But to say this of the magnetic fluid is wrong, as it is an essence which is quite perceptible to any clairvoyant, whether in darkness as in the case of odic emanations, or in light when animal magnetism is practiced. Being then a fluid in a supersensuous state, still matter, it cannot be immaterial, and the expression becomes at once as illogical as it is sophistical. With regard to the other forces, if by immaterial is meant only that which is objective, but beyond the range of our present normal perceptions or senses, well and good, but then whatever substantialists may mean by it, we occultists and theosophists demur to the form in which they put it. Substance, we are told in philosophical dictionaries and encyclopedias, is that which underlies outward phenomena, substratum, the permanent subject or cause of phenomena, whether material or spiritual, that in which properties inhere, that which is real in distinction from that which is only apparent, especially in this world of Maya. It is in short real, and the one real essence. But the occult sciences, while calling substance the noumenon of every material form, explain that noumenon as being still matter only on another plane. That which is noumenon to our human perceptions is matter to those of Adhyayan Kohan. As explained by our learned Vedantin brother T. Subbarao Malaprakriti, the first universal aspect of Parabrahma, its cosmic veil, and whose essence, to us, is unthinkable, is to the Logos as material as any object is. Material to us, notes on Bhag. Gita. Hence no occultist would describe substance as immaterial in esse. Substance is a confusing term, in any case. We may call the use of the terms matter, or substance existing in supersensuous conditions, or supersensuous states of matter would avoid an outburst of fierce but just criticism not only from men of science, but from any ordinary well-educated man who knows the value of terms. Body, or an ape, or a stone, as well as any kind of fabric substantial. Therefore, we call essence rather, the material of the bodies of those entities, the supersensuous beings, in whom we believe, and who do exist, but whom science and its admirers regard as superstitious nonsense, calling fictions alike apersonal. God and the angels of the Christians, as they would Ardhayan Kohans, or the Devas, planetary men, genii, etc., etc., of the Kabbalists and occultists. but the latter would never dream of calling the phenomena of light, sound, heat, cohesion, etc. entities, as substantialists do. They would define ethos forces as purely immaterial perceptive effects without, of substantial and essential causes within, at the ultimate end of which, or at the origin, stands an entity, the essence of the latter changing with that of the element 8 it belongs to. See Monads, Gods, and Atoms of Volume I. Secret Doctrine, Book 2. Nor can the soul be confused with forces, which are on quite another plane of perception. It shocks, therefore, a theosophist to find the substantialist so unphilosophically including soul among the forces. Having, as he tells his readers, laid the foundation of our argument in the clearly defined analogies of nature, the editor of the Scientific Arena, in an article called The Scientific Evidence of a Future Life, proceeds as follows: if the principles of substantialism be true, then, as there shown, every force or form of energy known to science must be a substantial entity. We further endeavored to show that if one form of force were conclusively demonstrated to be a substantial or objective existence, it would be a clear departure from reason and consistency not to assume all the forces or phenomena producing causes in nature also to be substantial entities. But if one form of physical force, or one single phenomenon producing cause, such as heat, light, or sound, could be clearly shown to be the mere motion of material particles, and not a substantial entity or thing, then by rational analogy and the harmonious uniformity of nature's laws, all the other forces or phenomena producing causes, whether physical, vital, mental, or spiritual, must come within the same category as non-entitative modes of motion of material particles. Hence it would follow in such case, that the soul, life, mind, or spirit, so far from being a substantial entity which can form the three, useless to remind again the reader, that by elements it is not the compound air, water and earth, that exist present to our terrestrial and sensuous perceptions that are meant but the nominal elements of the ancients. Basis of a hope for an immortal existence beyond the present life, must according to materialism, and as the mere motion of brain and nerve particles, cease to exist whenever such physical particles shall cease to move at death. Spirit a substantial entity. Surely substantialism cannot pretend very seriously to the title of philosophy in such case. But let us read the arguments to the end. Here we find a just and righteous attack on materialism wound up with the same unphilosophical assertion. From the foregoing statement of the salient positions of materialistic science, as they bear against the existence of the soul after death, we drew the logical conclusion that no Christian philosopher who accepts the current doctrines of sound, light and heat as but modes of molecular motion, can ever answer the analogical reasoning of the materialist against the immortality of man. No possible view, as we have so often insisted, can make the least headway against such materialistic reasoning or frame any reply to this great argument of Haeckel and Huxley against the soul as an entity and its possible existence separate from the body, save the teaching of substantialism, which so consistently maintains that the soul, life, mind, and spirit are necessarily substantial forces or entities from the analogies of physical science, namely, the substantial nature of all the physical forces, including gravity, electricity. Magnetism, cohesion, sound, light, heat, etc. This impregnable position of the substantialist from logical analogy, based on the harmonious uniformity of nature's law and forces, forms the bulwark of the substantial philosophy, and must in the nature of things forever constitute the strong tower of that system of teaching. If the edifice of substantialism, thus founded and fortified, can be taken and sacked by the forces of materialism, then our labors for so many years have manifestly come to naught. Say, if you please, that the armies of substantialism are thus burning the bridges behind them. So be it. We prefer death to either surrender or retreat, for if this fundamental position cannot be maintained against the combined forces of the enemy, then all is lost, materialism has gained the day, and death is the eternal annihilation of the human race. Within this central citadel of principles, therefore, we have entrenched ourselves to survive or perish, and here, encircled by this wall of adamant, we have stored all our treasures and munitions of war, and if the agnostic hordes of materialistic science wish to possess them, let them train upon it their heaviest artillery. How strange, then, when materialists themselves recognize the desperateness of their situation, and so readily grasp the true bearing of this analogical argument based on the substantial nature of the physical forces, that we should be obliged to reason with professed substantialists, giving them argument upon argument in order to prove to them that they are no substantialists at all, in the true sense of that term, so long as they leave one single force of nature or one single phenomenon producing cause in nature, out of the category of substantial entities. One minister of our acquaintance speaks glowingly of the ultimate success of the substantial philosophy, and proudly calls himself a substantialist, but refuses to include sound among the substantial forces and entities, thus virtually accepting the wave theory. In the name of all logical consistency, what could that minister say in reply to another substantialist who would insist upon the beauty and truth of substantialism, but who could not include light? And then another who could not include heat, or electricity, or magnetism, or gravity. Yet all of them good substantialists on the very same principle as is the one who leaves sound out of the substantial category, while still claiming to be an orthodox substantialist. Why should they not leave life force and mind force and spirit force out of the list of entities, thus making them, like sound force, as materialists insist, but the vibration of material particles, and still claim the right to call themselves good substantialists? Haeckel and Huxley would then be duly qualified candidates for baptism into the Church of Substantialism. The truth is, the minister who can admit for one moment that sound consists of but the motion of air particles, and thus, that it is not a substantial entity, is a materialist at bottom, though he may not be conscious of the logical maelstrom that is whirling him to scientific destruction. We have all heard of the play of Hamlet, with the Prince of Denmark left out. Such would be the scientific play of substantialism with the sound question ignored, and the theory of acoustics handed over to materialism. See our editorial on the meaning of the sound discussion, The Microcosm, Volume VP 197. We sympathize with the minister who refuses to include S01W among substantial entities. We believe in Fahad, but would hardly refer to his voice and emanations as entities, though they are produced by an electric shock of atoms and repercussions, producing both sound and light. Science would accept no more our Fahad than the sound or light entities of the substantial philosophy. But we have this satisfaction, at any rate, that, once thoroughly explained, Fahad will prove more philosophical than either the materialistic or substantial theories of the forces of nature. Flow can anyone with pretensions to both a scientific and psychological mind, speaking of soul and especially of spirit, place them on the same level as the physical phenomena of nature, and this, in a language one can apply only to physical facts. Even Professor Bain, a monistic annihilationist, as he is called, confesses that mental and bodily states are utterly contrasted. Thus, the direct conclusion the occultists and the theosophists can come to at any rate on prima facie evidence furnished them by writings which no philosophy can now rebut, is that substantial philosophy, which was brought forth into this world to fight materialistic science and to slay it, surpasses it immeasurably in materialism. No Bain, no Huxley, nor even Haeckel, has ever confused to this degree mental and physical phenomena. At the same time the apostles of materialism are on a higher plane of philosophy than their opponents. 4. The charge preferred against them of teaching that soul is the mere motion of brain and nerve particles is untrue, for they never did so teach. But, even supposing such would be their theory, it would only be in accordance with substantialism, since the latter assures us that soul and spirit, as much as all the phenomena producing causes, whether physical, mental, or spiritual if not regarded as substantial entities must come within the same category as non-entitative modes of motion of material particles. All this is not only painfully vague, but is almost meaningless. The inference that the acceptance of the received scientific theories on light, sound, and heat, etc., would be equivalent to accepting the sole motion of molecules is certainly hardly worth discussion. It is quite true that some 30 or 40 years ago Buchner and Moleschott attempted to prove that sensation and thought are a movement of matter. But this has been pronounced by a well-known English annihilationist unworthy of the name of philosophy. Not one man of real scientific reputation or of any eminence, not for the substantialists call, moreover, spirit that which we call mind, manas, and thus it is soul which takes with them the place of atma. In short, they confuse the vehicle with the driver inside. Tyndall, Huxley, Maudsley, Clifford, Bain, Spencer, nor Lewis, in England, nor Fierko, nor Haeckel in Germany, has ever gone so far as to say, thought is a motion of molecules. Their only quarrel with the believers in a soul was and is, that while the latter maintain that soul is the cause of thought, they, the scientists, assert that thought is the concomitant of certain physical processes in the brain. Nor have they ever said, the real scientists and philosophers, however materialistic, that thought and nervous motion are the same, but that they are the subjective and objective sides of the same thing. John Stuart Mill is a good authority and an example to quote, and thus deny the charge. For, speaking of the rough and rude method of attempting to resolve sensation into nervous motion, taking as his example the case of the nerve vibrations to the brain which are the physical side of the light perception, at the end of all these motions, there is a something which is not motion, there is a feeling or sensation of color, he says. Hence, it is quite true to say, that the subjective feeling here spoken of by Mill will outlive even the acceptance of the undulatory theory of light, or heat, as a mode of motion. For the latter is based on a physical speculation, and the former is built on everlasting philosophy, however imperfect, because so tainted with materialism. Our quarrel with the materialists is not so much for their soulless forces, as for their denying the existence of any force-bearer, the noumenon of light, electricity, etc. To accuse them of not making a difference between mental and physical phenomena is equal to proclaiming oneself ignorant of their theories. The most famous negationists are today the first to admit that self-consciousness and motion are at the opposite poles of existence. That which remains to be settled between us and the materialistic idealists, a living paradox by the way, now personified by the most eminent writers on idealistic philosophy in England, is the question whether that consciousness is only experienced in connection with organic molecules of the brain or not. We say it is the thought or mind which sets the molecules of the physical brain in motion. They deny any existence to mind, independent of the brain. But even they do not call the seat of the mind a molecular fabric, but only that it is the mind principle, the seat or the organic basis of the manifesting mind. That such is the real attitude of materialistic science may be demonstrated by reminding the reader of Mr. Tyndall's confessions in his Fragments of Science, for since the days of his discussions with Dr. Martineau, the attitude of the materialists has not changed. This attitude remains unaltered, unless, indeed, we place the hyloidists on the same level as Mr. Tyndall, which would be absurd. Treating of the phenomenon of consciousness, the great physicist quotes this question from Mr. Martineau: a man can say I feel, I think, I love, but how does consciousness infuse itself into the problem? And he thus answers, the passage from the physics of the brain to the corresponding facts of consciousness is unthinkable. Granted that a definite thought and a molecular action in the brain occur simultaneously, we do not possess the intellectual organ, nor apparently any rudiments of the organ, which would enable us to pass by a process of reasoning from one to the other. They appear together, but we do not know why. Were our minds and senses so expanded, strengthened, and illuminated, as to enable us to see and feel the very molecules of the brain, were we capable of following all their motions, all their groupings, all their electric discharges, if such there be, and were we intimately acquainted with the corresponding states of thought and feeling, we should be as far as ever from the solution of the problem, How are these physical processes connected with the facts of consciousness? The chasm between the two classes of phenomena would still remain intellectually impassable. Thus, there appears to be far less disagreement between the occultists and modern science than between the former and the substantialists. The latter confuse most hopelessly the subjective with the objective phases of all phenomena, and the scientists do not, withstanding that they limit the subjective to the earthly or terrestrial phenomena only. In this they have chosen the Cartesian method with regard to atoms and molecules. We hold to the ancient and primitive philosophical beliefs, so intuitively perceived by Leibniz. Our system can thus be called, as his was spiritualistic and atomistic. Substantialists speak with great scorn of the vibratory theory of science. But, until able to prove that their views would explain the phenomena as well, filling, moreover, the actual gaps and flaws in the modern hypotheses, they have hardly the right to use such a tone. As all such theories and speculations are only provisional, we may well leave them alone. Science has made wonderful discoveries on the objective side of all the physical phenomena. Where it is really wrong is, when it perceives in matter alone, i.e., in that matter which is known to it the alpha and the omega of all phenomena. To reject the scientific theory, however, of vibrations in light and sound, is to court as much ridicule as the scientists do in rejecting physical and objective spiritualistic phenomena by attributing them all to fraud. Science has ascertained and proved the exact rapidity with which the sound waves travel, and it has artificially imitated on the data of transmission of sound by those waves the human voice and other acoustic phenomena, the sensation of sound, the response of the sensory tract to an objective stimulus. Atmospheric vibrations is an affair of consciousness, and to call sound an entity on this plane is to objectivate most ridiculously a subjective phenomenon which is but an effect after all, the lower end of a concatenation of causes. If materialism locates all in objective matter and fails to see the origin and primary causes of the forces, so much the worse for the materialists, for it only shows the limitations of their own capacities of hearing and seeing, limitations which Huxley, for one, recognizes, for he is unable on his own confession to define the boundaries of our senses, and still asserts his materialistic tendency by locating sounds only in cells of matter, and on our sensuous plane. Behold, the great biologist dwarfing our senses and curtailing the powers of man and nature in his usual ultra-poetical language. Hear him, as quoted by Sterling concerning protoplasm, speak of the wonderful noonday silence of a tropical forest, which is after all due only to the dullness of our hearing, and could our ears only catch the murmurs of these tiny maelstroms as they whirl in the innumerable myriads of living cells which constitute each tree, we should be stunned as with the roar of a great city. The telephone and the phonograph, moreover, are there to upset any theory except the vibratory one, however materialistically expressed. Hence, the attempt of the substantialists to show the fallacy of the wave theory of sound as universally taught, and to outline the substantial theory of acoustics, cannot be successful. If they shew that sound is not a mode of motion in its origin, and that the forces are not merely the qualities and property of matter induced or generated in, by, and through matter, under certain conditions they will have achieved a great triumph. But, whether as substance, matter, or effect, sound and light can never be divorced from their modes of manifesting through vibrations, as the whole subjective or occult nature is one everlasting perpetual motion of vortical vibrations. H.P.B. Theosophical Literature ISIS Unveiled, A Master Key to the Mysteries of Ancient and Modern Science and Theology by H.P. Blavatsky Vol. I Science, XLV plus 628 pages. Vol. 2 Theology, 4 plus 640 pp. This exhaustive study of religion and science was Madame Blavatsky's first presentation of theosophy to the modern world. It is reproduced in photographic facsimile of the original edition, 1877, 2 volumes bound in one, cloth, complete with general index and supplementary topical index. American edition The Secret Doctrine, The Synthesis of Science, Religion, and Philosophy by H.P. Blavatsky Vol. I Cosmogenesis, Slay I plus 676 pages. Volume U Anthropogenesis, 14 plus 798 pages. A systematic development of theosophical teachings on cosmogenesis, anthropogenesis, symbolism, comparative religion, with extensive comparisons of ancient wisdom with scientific conceptions. Facsimile of original, 1888, edition, 2 volumes bound in 1, cloth, complete with index, XXXPP. American edition index to the Secret Doctrine, all volume and page reference to the original edition, London 1888, and to the photographic facsimile reproduction, listed above, reprint X plus 172 pages. American edition The Key to Theosophy, an exposition, in question and answer, of the ethics, science, and philosophy of Theosophy by H. P. Blavatsky, reprint of original edition, 1889, 15 plus 367 pages. Indian edition The Voice of the Silence, by H. P. Blavatsky, a blank verse rendition of chosen fragments from the Book of the Golden Precepts, belonging to the Contemplative or Mahayana, Yogacarya, school. Reprint of the original edition, 1889, 4 plus 79 pages, cloth. Indian edition Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, by H. P. Blavatsky, reprint of the original, 1923, XXIV plus 149 pages, cloth. American edition A Modern Panarayan, by H. P. Blavatsky, a collection of fugitive fragments. American edition The Ocean of Theosophy by William Q. Judge.